I never thought a day like this would feel like a betrayal. I whispered to myself as I entered the cold marble foyer of the church, the air heavy with the scent of lilies and the soft murmur of distant voices. My hands tightened around the edge of my purse as I glanced at the polished wood pews, each one lined with somber faces that barely register my presence. The funeral for my husband, Richard, should have been a moment for mourning, for family coming together. Yet the atmosphere felt sharp, calculated, and strangely hollow. I noticed Romy standing near the casket, her posture composed, her smile faint but deliberate, the kind of smile that concealed more than it revealed. My son, Wade, hovered nearby, shifting uncomfortably from one foot to the other, eyes darting between us, as if choosing sides before anyone else had the chance. I took a slow breath, reminding myself to maintain the calm that had always defined me, a calm that masked the storm gathering beneath my chest. Every detail of the room seemed exaggerated in its precision, from the gleaming brass handles of the hymnals to the soft echo of footsteps along the marble floor, as though every sound was a reminder that I was no longer in control. The whispered condolences of distant relatives felt distant, their words polite but devoid of warmth, each syllable underscoring the isolation that had begun to creep into my life. I lowered myself onto a pew at the back, folding my hand in my lap, eyes fixed on the casket that bore the man I had shared 42 years of my life with, a life built on careful planning, devotion, and quiet strength. Memories surfaced unbidden. Sunday breakfasts in our sunlit kitchen, Richard's gentle guidance through moments of doubt, the careful way he nurtured Wade's ambitions, all reminders of what had been and what had been lost. Yet as my gaze shifted to Romy, her calculating expression and Wade's uneasy stance told me everything I needed to know. They were measuring, calculating, assessing what I might do, unaware that every movement I made was deliberate, every breath a part of silent strategy. I allowed my lips to curve into a small, unreadable smile, a gesture so subtle it could have gone unnoticed, yet it carried the weight of experience, the quiet assertion of someone who had weathered storms far greater than this. The organ played a soft chord in the background, and I let the notes wash over me, grounding my thoughts even as the sting of their indifference pressed against my ribs. The floral arrangements, pristine and fragrant, seemed almost mocking in their perfection, a stark contrast to the turmoil beneath my skin. I noticed a folded piece of paper protruding from the casket stand, a document left for me, unopened, a whisper of the financial legacy that Romy assumed I was oblivious to. My mind traced the contours of the legal language I knew awaited me, the numbers and figures that could shift power with a signature, yet I remained seated, silent, observing. The murmurs of the attendees faded into a background hum as I considered the magnitude of what lay ahead, the calculated cruelty veiled behind smiles and polite gestures. I could feel the tension in the air, the way the subtle glances passed between mother and son, daughter-in-law and husband, all underestimating the quiet vigilance that had always been my shield. I adjusted the shawl around my shoulders, the cool fabric a reminder of the composure I had cultivated over decades, and I allowed my mind to catalog the unfolding scene, every movement, every whispered word, storing them for the precise moment when observation would turn into revelation. The choir began a hymn, soft but insistent, and I joined in silently, my voice a murmur beneath the swell of music, grounding myself in tradition while the undercurrent of betrayal surged around me. Every calculated smile from Romy, every hesitant glance from Wade, became data, pieces of a puzzle that I was already beginning to assemble. I did not flinch, I did not react with anger. My presence alone, steady and unbroken, carried a weight they could not yet measure. As the service continued, I allowed the story to unfold silently around me, knowing that patience and precision were my allies, and that the $28 million they assumed I was unaware of was a truth I held close, ready to wield when the moment demanded. After the service ended, I remained seated in the back pew, allowing the church to empty around me. The soft echo of footsteps faded into silence. leaving the polished floors gleaming under the muted sunlight streaming through the stained glass. I rose slowly, moving toward the exit with measured steps, each movement deliberate, observing the interactions of Romy and Wade as they spoke with distant relatives. Their laughter was quiet, controlled, as if rehearsed for effect, and I noted the subtle tension in their gestures, the way they avoided looking directly at me. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and damp earth from the small cemetery just beyond the church doors. I paused for a moment, adjusting the weight of my coat, and let my gaze travel over the grounds, noting the arrangement of the floral wreaths, the careful placement of each bouquet, all immaculate, almost sterile. Each detail reminded me of the precision with which Romy had orchestrated her presence, every action calculated, every word measured. I walked slowly toward the car, noting the crispness of the leaves beneath my shoes, the subtle chill biting at my fingers, grounding me in the present while my mind traced the patterns of manipulation I had witnessed. Wade lingered near the steps, glancing back at me occasionally, his expression uncertain, betraying a flicker of conscience that he quickly suppressed. I allowed a small, polite smile to touch my lips, acknowledging his glance without betraying the storm of thoughts inside me. Once inside the car, I sat with my hands folded in my lap, the familiar leather cool against my skin, and allowed the quiet to settle around me. I thought of the house Richard and I had built together, every room a testament to our years, each corner holding memories of ordinary days filled with love and care. I recalled the morning routines, the laughter in the kitchen, the quiet conversations in the living room, and contrasted them with the calculated civility Romy displayed. I could feel the subtle shift in power, the way she assumed control without force, her actions veiled in politeness, yet commanding influence over Wade. My mind began to outline the steps I would take, the patient observation, the quiet accumulation of details, preparing for a moment when knowledge and timing would grant me leverage. I reviewed the gestures, the words, the expressions, filing them in memory with careful attention to nuance, knowing that every overlooked signal could later become an advantage. The car engine hummed gently as I drove away from the church, the roads lined with amber leaves, the afternoon light fading softly into evening. Each turn of the wheel felt deliberate, echoing the deliberate planning I had practiced for decades. I allowed myself a quiet satisfaction, a sense of control restored through mindfulness and foresight, knowing that patience and discernment were the most potent tools I possessed. The world around me moved obliviously, the gravity of their assumptions about my awareness unchallenged, and I embraced the quiet strength in observing without revealing, understanding that the true power often lay in measured restraint and the accumulation of insight before the final reveal. The following morning, I returned to the quiet of my home, the familiar creak of the front steps greeting me like an old companion. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting patterns on the polished hardwood floors, highlighting the dust motes that danced lazily in the warmth. I made my way to the kitchen, setting down my purse and straightening the tablecloth, a ritual of order in a day that felt anything but ordinary. Each object in a room seemed to hold memories, reminders of shared meals and laughter with Richard, of discussions with Wade about school projects and college plans, all layered over the years with care and intention. As I poured a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the room, I reflected on the subtle shifts I had observed during the funeral, the nuances in Romy and Wade's behavior, the way Romy's polite expressions hid a calculated indifference. I considered the small gestures, the half-smiles, the deliberate pauses in conversation, each one a thread in a web of manipulation they had spun without awareness of my quiet attention. The mail arrived, and I picked up the stack, noting the usual bills and correspondence. But one envelope in particular caught my eye, the return address familiar yet unexpected. I set the coffee aside and opened it carefully, the crisp paper revealing documents that hinted at financial arrangements they assumed I did not comprehend. I did not react immediately. I folded the papers neatly, placing them in order, absorbing the implications, and cataloging each detail. In the living room, I paused to glance at family photographs, noting how the images of Wade and Romy together contrasted with the absent presence of Richard, the subtle way Romy had always positioned herself near the camera, a silent assertion of control. I traced the timeline of events in my mind, linking small observations from past gatherings, the subtle redirection of conversations, the selective attention to my comments, and a strategic absence of support from Wade when I had needed it. Each recollection reinforced a growing understanding that the patterns were deliberate, calculated, and ongoing, a slow erosion of influence that had gone unnoticed by all but me. I allowed myself a moment to sit by the window, the garden bathed in soft morning light, and let the silence deepen, considering how best to proceed without revealing my awareness prematurely. Every plan I considered was measured, every potential interaction evaluated for its impact, knowing that the power of observation, patience, and timing would far outweigh any immediate confrontation. The wind rustled the leaves outside, a gentle reminder that life continued, that time moved forward, and that my actions, though deliberate and quiet, would align with the truths I had gathered over years. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth spread through me, appreciating the calm surface I presented to the world while beneath it, calculations and reflections continued, setting the stage for measured responses that would unfold with precision when the moment arrived. Throughout the day, I maintained routines with deliberate normalcy, greeting neighbors, tending to household tasks, and observing interactions with a subtle, unwavering focus. I noted the way delivery personnel glanced at me, the subtle respect or curiosity in their demeanor, and stored these impressions, recognizing that all observations contributed to a clearer understanding of those around me. Evening approached, and I allowed the fading light to cast long shadows across the floors, each one a reminder of the passage of time and the continuity of life despite the undercurrent of family tension. I prepared a modest dinner, setting the table with care, and moved through the motions with deliberate grace, aware that the calm exterior I maintained was the strongest statement I could make, conveying composure, control, and an unspoken promise that the truths I held would be revealed on my terms. As the sun dipped lower, casting a warm amber glow across the kitchen, I moved methodically from counter to counter, arranging the day's mail, placing the bills and correspondence in neat stacks, and letting the silence of the house settle around me. The subtle creak of the floorboards beneath my feet was comforting, a familiar rhythm that reminded me of decades spent in this home, raising Wade, sharing mornings with Richard, and maintaining the order and care that defined our family life. I paused at the window, observing the garden where the autumn leaves had begun to blanket the ground in shades of gold and crimson, and I considered the parallel with the layers of appearances Romy had built around herself, the polite smiles concealing ambition, calculation, and indifference. I sipped my tea slowly, the warmth grounding me as I reflected on the interactions of the previous day, the subtleties I had cataloged, and the threads of manipulation I had begun to trace in my mind. Each glance, each half-smile, each carefully chosen word from Romy had been noted, stored, and weighed against the backdrop of years of experience, and I allowed the slow, deliberate pacing of my observations to shape a quiet strategy. In the living room, the photographs of Richard and me stood as silent witnesses, their familiar faces reflecting joy, love, and the careful construction of a family that had been slowly tested and strained over time. I examined them with care, noting the ways in which Romy had inserted herself into memories and narratives, subtly repositioning herself, claiming influence and asserting control, often unnoticed by Wade, who followed her lead, oblivious to the precision of her intentions. The gentle ticking of the wall clock became a metronome for my thoughts, marking the passage of time while I moved through familiar tasks with measured calm, folding laundry, straightening cushions, and arranging flowers on the dining table, each action deliberate and infused with a quiet purpose. I reviewed the documents I had glimpsed earlier, the numbers and arrangements that were likely meant to intimidate or mislead, and I cataloged them mentally, noting inconsistencies and opportunities for clarity that could later become leverage. The late afternoon light softened against the walls, and I allowed myself a moment to sit on the sofa, hands folded in my lap, breathing slowly, feeling the strength that came from patience, observation, and restraint. Each sound from outside, the distant rumble of traffic, the soft calls of neighborhood children, the occasional rustle of a branch, reinforced my awareness of the world continuing, unaware of the quiet vigilance I maintained within my home. I thought of Wade moving through the rooms, performing polite gestures, yet unaware of the attention I paid to every detail, the nuanced expressions that revealed more than words ever could. I allowed my mind to organize the observations, creating patterns, mapping intentions, and anticipating moves, all without ever revealing the depth of my awareness. As evening deepened and the shadows lengthened across the floor, I prepared a simple dinner, setting the table with the same care and attention as always, a silent assertion of the order and dignity that I carried with me, even as the undercurrent of family dynamics remained charged with tension. The ritual of placing each plate, folding each napkin, and aligning the silverware became a meditation, reinforcing the calm exterior I presented to the world while quietly fortifying my understanding of the unseen currents shaping the actions of those around me. I moved through these tasks with deliberate grace, the knowledge that observation and patience held more power than immediate confrontation, guiding each step, each breath, and each measured gesture, ensuring that the truths I had gathered would be employed with precision when the moment to act arrived. The following evening, I received a call from my niece, Emma, her voice low and hesitant, carrying a tone of concern that immediately captured my full attention. She had always been perceptive, noticing things that others overlooked, and now she shared details of conversations she had overheard between Romy and some of Wade's colleagues regarding finances and household control. I listened carefully, letting each word settle in, cataloging the information and comparing it to the observations I had made over the past 2 days. Emma mentioned subtle comments Romy had made about the value of the estate, the way she had implied that I was unaware of certain transfers, and the casual assumptions that I would not question them. I remained silent on the phone, asking only clarifying questions and letting her speak freely, absorbing every nuance, tone, and hesitation. Once the call ended, I sat back in my chair, letting the dim light from the living room lamp cast long shadows across the room, and I allowed my thoughts to weave together the pieces of information into a coherent picture. Each fragment from Emma lined up with the previous observations, the documents I had seen, and the behavior I had witnessed at the funeral, reinforcing a growing certainty that their actions were deliberate and their underestimation of me was profound. I went to the study, a room Richard had loved, where we had spent countless evenings discussing plans, reviewing papers, and organizing household affairs. I spread the documents and notes across the desk, arranging them in chronological order, tracing movements, intentions, and implications. The rhythm of my hands moving across the paper, the rustle of envelopes, and the weight of each sheet grounded me in a sense of control and clarity. I considered the upcoming interactions, the conversations that would inevitably take place, and the subtle ways I could leverage this knowledge, not through confrontation, but through the careful revelation of facts that they believed I had never comprehended. The quiet ticking of the grandfather clock punctuated the space, marking time as I planned, considering sequences, anticipating responses, and refining my approach. I moved around the study, noting the placement of objects, the familiar arrangement of books and files, and allowed my mind to overlay strategies atop the physical layout, visualizing scenarios, dialogues, and reactions. The evening deepened, and the house grew quiet, the only sounds the faint hum of the heater and the occasional rustle of leaves outside. I prepared a cup of chamomile tea and sipped slowly, letting the warmth fill me while my mind rehearsed potential revelations, the timing, and the subtleties required to maintain the calm exterior while delivering impact. Each detail mattered. The tone, the phrasing, the order of information, all designed to assert presence and authority without overt display. I allowed myself to sit in the armchair, enveloped in the soft glow of the lamp, letting the collected knowledge, the quiet understanding of Romy's and Wade's assumptions, and the careful curation of facts settle into a coherent strategy. In this silent, deliberate reflection, I recognized the strength that came from patience, observation, and the accumulation of insight, knowing that the precise moment to reveal what I had learned would carry far more weight than any immediate reaction. The night closed in, and I felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of preparedness, the knowledge that my awareness and restraint were already reshaping the dynamics around me, setting the stage for controlled and meaningful action when the time came. The next morning, the house was bathed in the soft golden light of early autumn, the air crisp and carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves from the yard. I moved through the rooms with deliberate calm, noting the subtle details that Romy and Wade often overlooked, the alignment of photographs, the slight disorder of books, the placement of personal items, and consider how each small observation fit into the larger pattern of their assumptions. I prepared a light breakfast, setting a single plate on the table, arranging the silverware and a cup of coffee just so, as I always had, the act itself grounding me while my mind worked steadily, connecting dots and assessing probabilities. I reviewed the documents Emma had brought to my attention, noting inconsistencies, small annotations, and overlooked details that hinted at intentions, miscalculations, and assumptions about my ignorance. Every envelope, every line of print became a part of the larger narrative, a web of subtle manipulations that I was beginning to fully comprehend. I moved to the study, laying out the notes and documents, each arranged with care to highlight connections, patterns, and anomalies that would be useful in future conversations. The quiet of the house allowed me to think without interruption, to organize my thoughts, and to visualize potential interactions with precision, anticipating responses, missteps, and opportunities. I considered Wade's hesitation during the funeral, Romy's composed expressions, the carefully measured pauses, all revealing the undercurrents of control, expectation, and assumption that had guided their behavior. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth settle, my focus unwavering as I rehearsed how each observation could later be leveraged without confrontation, the power of knowledge and timing outweighing any immediate action. Outside, the wind rustled through the branches, and I allowed my eyes to drift to the garden, the sunlight catching on the golden leaves, a reminder of seasons passing, cycles of growth, and patience. I reflected on the countless mornings spent with Richard, planning, organizing, nurturing, and maintaining a household that thrived on order, care, and attention to detail, and I recognized how those same skills now served a different purpose. Careful observation, strategic patience, and the accumulation of insight. The quiet hum of the heating system, the distant sound of traffic, and the occasional bird call created a backdrop for my thoughts, each sound grounding me in the present while the mind plotted its course. I moved through the motions of daily tasks, tidying, arranging, checking details, each act deliberate, a quiet reinforcement of the control I maintained within my home and my awareness of those who assumed I had none. The day progressed in measured calm, each step, each observation, each decision part of a larger plan, a silent strategy that would unfold in its own time, revealing knowledge and awareness that Romy and Wade had never anticipated. And through this quiet vigilance, I felt the strength and clarity that came from patience, attention, and the deliberate gathering of understanding. By mid-morning, the house had settled into a quiet rhythm, the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the grandfather clock marking the passage of time. I moved through the rooms with careful attention, noting the subtle shifts in light across the polished floors, the way the curtains swayed with the breeze, and the faint scent of the autumn air drifting through the open windows. Each movement I made was deliberate, from arranging the mail into neat piles to adjusting the position of the sofa cushions, maintaining a sense of order and control that contrasted sharply with the underlying tension that had been building over the past days. I poured a cup of herbal tea and carried it to the study, where I had organized the documents Emma had provided, laying them out on the desk in precise order, each one a fragment of the larger narrative I had begun to assemble. As I reviewed the notes and cross-referenced them with my own observations, I noticed patterns that spoke to the calculated nature of Romy's influence, her subtle insistence on steering conversations and decisions without ever appearing confrontational. I reflected on Wade's behavior as well, the hesitant glances, the minor adjustments in tone, and the careful choices of words, all indicative of his internal conflict and his reliance on Romy's judgment. The sunlight moved slowly across the room, highlighting the lines of concentration etched into my face, the quiet intensity in my posture as I considered the unfolding dynamics. I paused to gaze out the window, the garden below awash with golden leaves and gentle shadows, and let the calmness of the scene reinforce the deliberate patience I had cultivated. Every action in the house, from the placement of the plates on the counter to the folding of the napkins, was executed with precision, reflecting both continuity of routine and a steady assertion of presence. I allowed myself to imagine the conversations that would eventually occur, mapping out sequences, anticipating responses, and evaluating the potential impact of each revelation I planned to disclose. The subtle creaks of the floorboards underfoot, the faint rustle of leaves outside, and the occasional chirp of birds became a steady backdrop to my strategic thinking, grounding me as I mentally rehearsed measured statements, calibrated reactions, and carefully timed disclosures. I revisited the documents once more, tracing connections and identifying moments where awareness of certain facts could shift perception, influence decisions, and establish a new equilibrium. The afternoon deepened, and the natural light waned, casting longer shadows across the rooms, and I allowed the quiet to envelop me, maintaining composure while the mind worked steadily, assembling insights, evaluating intentions, and preparing for the precise moment when the culmination of observation, patience, and subtle strategy would align to reveal the depth of understanding and control I had preserved throughout these challenging days. Each deliberate gesture, each quiet act of observation, was a testament to the experience, the resilience, and the quiet authority I carried, ensuring that when the time came, the truths I held would be presented with clarity, precision, and unwavering calm. The late afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting long, soft stripes across the living room floor as I moved quietly among the familiar furniture, arranging pillows and straightening the throw on the sofa, every action deliberate and measured. I paused to glance at the framed photographs on the mantel, the images of Richard, Wade, and Moment from holidays and family gatherings reflecting back the passage of years and the careful construction of our shared life. My attention lingered on small details, subtle shifts in expressions captured in photographs that, in hindsight, hinted at the changes I had begun to notice, the silent assertions of Romy's influence over Wade and the home itself. I poured a cup of tea and carried it to the study, where the documents I had been reviewing lay neatly in stacks, each one carefully marked and annotated as I traced the unfolding patterns of actions and intentions. The quiet ticking of the wall clock provided a steady rhythm as I moved through the information, aligning observations from the past days with the context Emma had provided, mapping strategies and potential outcomes without rushing, allowing the details to form a coherent narrative in my mind. I allowed myself a moment to sit by the window, observing the garden below where the leaves had turned golden and the late light bathed the yard in warmth, and I considered the subtle manipulations I had witnessed, the polite facades that concealed calculated choices. Each movement of Romy and Wade during the funeral, each hesitation, glance, and measured phrase now fit into a larger understanding, and I cataloged these details mentally, noting implications for future interactions. I walked slowly to the bookshelf, running my fingers over the spines, recalling conversations Richard and I had shared about planning, trust, and the careful management of our household, and I recognized how those lessons now applied in a different way, through observation, patience, and strategic awareness. The house remained still, allowing me to focus on the rhythm of thought and planning, the deliberate assembling of information and timing, and the assessment of what, when, and how to reveal insights to maximize awareness without confrontation. As the evening deepened, shadows stretched across the floors and walls, softening the space while I moved with calm precision, setting aside papers, noting points of significance, and rehearsing mental sequences of interactions that might occur in the coming days. Each sip of tea, each small adjustment of items in the room, reinforced the composed exterior I presented to the world, a contrast to the quiet intensity of the mind at work. I felt this strength of observation and restraint, the clarity of understanding that comes from careful attention to detail, and the confidence that each choice, each measured step, would allow me to navigate the unfolding dynamics with authority and precision, maintaining calm while preparing to act decisively when the moment of revelation arrived. As the evening deepened into night, I remained in the study, the soft glow of the desk lamp illuminating the neatly arranged documents and notes, casting gentle shadows that stretched across the polished hardwood floor. I moved slowly, methodically, reviewing each paper and cross-referencing every detail, letting the information settle into patterns that only I could see, a quiet map of intentions, actions, and assumptions. Outside, the breeze rustled the golden leaves, a soft accompaniment to the rhythmic ticking of the clock, marking time while I continued my deliberate work. I reflected on the subtle behaviors of Romy and Wade, the precise expressions, the calculated politeness, and the way each gesture had been layered over years of family interactions, all now revealing an intricate web of assumptions about my awareness and understanding. I sipped my tea, the warmth grounding me as my mind traced connections and possibilities, aligning each observation with the documents I had gathered and the conversations Emma had shared. Every piece of information, every nuance became a tool, an element in a strategy built on patience, timing, and quiet authority. I allowed my thoughts to wander through scenarios, imagining the subtle reveals, the precise phrasing of statements, and a measured delivery of facts that would alter perceptions without confrontation, each possibility considered and cataloged. The night was calm, and I let the stillness envelop me, a companion to my meticulous planning and strategic patience. I moved to the living room, adjusting the cushions, folding a throw with careful precision, maintaining the appearance of routine while my mind mapped the intricate dance of intentions, assumptions, and knowledge. The photographs on the walls and mantel became more than images. They were reminders of years of experience, lessons learned, and the quiet power of observation. I reviewed the financial documents, the subtle annotations, the emails and receipts, each holding implications that Romy and Wade believed I did not recognize. I considered the timing of each potential conversation, the way I would guide interactions, and the impact of revealing insights with subtlety, ensuring that the calm exterior I maintained would only amplify the effect of the eventual disclosure. The shadows lengthened, and I felt the satisfaction of preparedness, the steady assurance that observation, patience, and deliberate action had placed me in a position of quiet control. I moved through the motions of the evening, the preparation of a simple tea, the careful arrangement of items, the deliberate pacing of steps across the floor, each act reinforcing presence, composure, and authority. Every moment of quiet reflection and careful planning had accumulated into a readiness that required nothing but timing and discernment, ensuring that the revelations, when delivered, would have the intended clarity and weight. I allowed the stillness of the house to settle around me, feeling the strength that comes from measured observation and the quiet anticipation of a moment when understanding, patience, and insight would converge to reveal truths that had been carefully gathered and preserved.